Think about the most charming person you've ever met, the one who walked into a room and immediately owned it, who made you feel, in those first few minutes, like you were the only person they wanted to talk to, who seemed to know exactly what to say, exactly when to say it, and exactly how to make you feel special doing it. Now think about what happened 6 months later. For most people, that memory doesn't end well, and the reason it doesn't end well has nothing to do with bad luck, or timing, or you being naive. It has to do with something psychologists identified decades ago and spent years trying to understand. A pattern so consistent, so measurable, and so deeply woven into human social behavior that researchers gave it a name. They called it the dark triad. And here is the part nobody tells you up front. You're almost certainly around at least one person who fits this profile right now. Not a fictional villain, not someone in a true crime documentary, someone in your life, someone you probably trust. Let's start with what the dark triad actually is, because most people get this wrong. The term was coined in 2002 by psychologists Delroy Paulhus and Kevin Williams at the University of British Columbia. They weren't trying to create a dramatic label. They were trying to solve a specific scientific problem. For years, researchers studying personality had been treating narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy as three completely separate things, studying them in isolation, publishing separate papers, building separate theoretical frameworks. Paulhus and Williams looked at the data and noticed something nobody had explicitly pointed out yet. These three traits kept appearing together in the same people, not always in equal amounts, but together, reliably, consistently, across different cultures, different age groups, different demographic profiles. They published their findings in the Journal of Research in Personality. Their conclusion was simple and unsettling. These are not three separate problems. They are three expressions of the same underlying pattern. Narcissism, on its own, is a word most people think they understand, but clinical narcissism is not the same thing as confidence or self-promotion. The narcissism in the dark triad is characterized by a specific combination: an inflated and fragile sense of superiority, a deep hunger for admiration from others, and an almost complete inability to genuinely empathize with people outside of how those people reflect back on them. The narcissist in this profile does not simply love themselves, they require others to confirm that love constantly, and they experience any threat to that confirmation as something close to a personal attack. Machiavellianism is named after Niccolò Machiavelli, the 16th century Florentine political philosopher whose most famous work, The Prince, essentially argued that power is the only real currency and that morality is a tool to be deployed strategically rather than lived sincerely. In psychological terms, Machiavellianism describes people who are strategically deceptive, who plan their social interactions several moves ahead, who are genuinely comfortable manipulating others when it serves their goals, and who view most human relationships through the lens of what can be extracted from them. Psychopathy, in this context, is not the serial killer version the word conjures. Subclinical psychopathy, which is what the dark triad describes, refers to people with significantly reduced capacity for empathy, a tendency toward impulsivity and thrill-seeking, and a remarkable ability to remain calm and charming in situations that would cause most people visible distress. Psychopaths in this model are not necessarily violent. They are, in many cases, extraordinarily functional, extraordinarily successful. Here is what makes the combination so potent. Each trait, on its own, comes with obvious social costs. A pure narcissist, without the strategic intelligence of Machiavellianism, tends to be easy to read. Their ego is too visible, their need for validation too obvious. A pure Machiavellian, without the surface charm of narcissism or the fearlessness of psychopathy, might be seen as cold and calculating. A pure psychopath, without the strategic planning of Machiavellianism, might be too impulsive to sustain the long game. But when these three traits appear together, they produce something that operates almost like a social superpower. The charm is real and disarming. The strategy is invisible, and the ability to stay calm under pressure makes the whole performance look effortless. This is why you don't see them coming. In 2012, psychologist Peter Jonassen at the University of Western Sydney ran a series of studies looking specifically at how people with dark triad traits operate in everyday social environments. What he found ran counter to what most people would expect. Dark triad individuals are not universally disliked in the short term. They are often, initially, extremely well liked. They score higher on measures of physical attractiveness, not because they are objectively more attractive, but because they invest more deliberately in their appearance and presentation. They are better at initiating conversations, at making people feel heard, at identifying what a specific person wants to hear and delivering it with precision. They are, in a very clinical sense, more socially skilled than average. The costs only appear later, and by the time they do, something has usually already shifted in the relationship. There's a reason this pattern didn't die out across human history, and it's not a comfortable reason. In evolutionary terms, these traits offer genuine advantages in certain social environments. In a world of competing groups, of political hierarchies, of scarce resources and shifting alliances, the ability to read people quickly, to present a compelling version of yourself, to make strategic decisions without being paralyzed by guilt, and to take risks others wouldn't take could mean the difference between having power and not having it. Researchers like Jonasson have argued that these traits didn't persist because evolution made a mistake. They persisted because they worked. In specific contexts, for specific goals, they still do. This is the part that should make you stop and think for a moment, because it changes the entire frame. The popular understanding of dark triad individuals is that they are broken in some fundamental way, that they are defective versions of normal people, and that all we need to do is identify them and keep our distance. But the research doesn't support that conclusion. What the research actually shows is something more uncomfortable. Dark triad traits exist on a spectrum. They are not binary, and they are far more common in the general population than most people realize. Studies using validated personality assessments consistently find that somewhere between 6 and 12% of the general population scores meaningfully high on combined dark triad measures. In specific environments, that number is significantly higher. Kevin Dutton at the University of Oxford spent years studying the relationship between psychopathy and professional success. He found that certain fields, by their nature, select for subclinical psychopathic traits. CEOs, lawyers, surgeons, media personalities, police officers, special forces soldiers. These are not random examples. They are professions where emotional detachment, quick decisive action, a high tolerance for stress, and a willingness to make choices that harm some people to benefit others are not just tolerated. They are required. Dutton estimated that roughly 1 in 5 CEOs scores in a range consistent with subclinical psychopathy. Not because these people are all predators, because the environment rewarded the trait. The same logic applies to Machiavellianism in politics, and to narcissism in entertainment, in social media, in any field where visibility is currency. You don't have to manufacture dark triad people. You just have to build environments that systematically reward what they offer and create conditions for them to rise. Now here is where it gets personal, because the question most people ask when they learn about this is not an abstract one. They're not thinking about corporate boardrooms or political systems. They're thinking about someone specific, a friend, a partner, a family member, a colleague, someone they feel pulled toward in ways they can't entirely explain, and someone who has left them feeling confused, diminished, or off balance in ways they couldn't name until now. The research on how dark triad individuals operate in close personal relationships is some of the most consistent in the entire field. In romantic contexts, people who score high on dark triad measures are significantly more likely to engage in short-term mating strategies, meaning they are less interested in building long-term committed partnerships and more oriented toward acquiring multiple partners with minimal investment. They are more likely to cheat, and they are more likely to cheat without the guilt response that typically follows infidelity in people without these traits. They are more likely to use emotional manipulation to maintain relationships they want to keep, and to discard relationships they no longer find useful, often abruptly, and without the emotional processing that most people expect. Researcher Jonasson coined the term the dark triad of mating strategies specifically to describe this pattern. He found that dark triad individuals are aware, often explicitly, that they operate differently than most people in relationships. They are not confused about what they are doing it intentionally, and yet the pull toward them is real. This is important to understand, because the narrative that says you must be foolish, or weak, or somehow broken to be drawn to someone like this is not supported by the evidence. The charm is real. The initial attentiveness is real. The sense that this person sees you in a way others don't is real, because they are specifically skilled at creating that feeling. You are not failing a test by being affected by it. You are responding normally to a behavior pattern that was specifically optimized to produce that response. What the research gives you is not a reason to feel shame about the past. It gives you something more valuable than that. It gives you a map. There are specific behavioral signatures that appear early in interactions with high dark triad individuals. Love bombing, which is the rapid and overwhelming deployment of of affection and attention early in a relationship is one of the most documented. It feels like intensity. It feels like connection. What it actually is, in many cases, is a technique. Another early signature is the pattern of testing emotional boundaries to assess how far they can be pushed, not dramatically, initially. Small tests, small moments of putting their needs above yours and watching how you respond. A third is what researchers call the shift, the moment, usually after some form of investment on your part, where the charming presentation drops, not completely, not all at once, but enough to disorient you, enough to make you work to bring back the version of them you originally met. You cannot bring back that version. In most cases, it was never entirely real. In 2018, psychologist Minna Lyons at the University of Liverpool published research examining how dark triad individuals are perceived after people become aware of their traits. What she found was that awareness changes everything. Once people understood what they were looking at, the same behaviors that had seemed attractive became readable as patterns. The charm became visible as a performance. The confidence became recognizable as a specific type of social calculation. Knowing the map doesn't make you immune, but it makes the territory legible in a way it wasn't before. Here is the harder truth that almost none of the popular articles about this topic will tell you. The dark triad is not a perfect predictor. Not everyone who is charming is calculating. Not everyone who is confident has a fragile ego underneath. Not everyone who is emotionally detached is incapable of growth or genuine connection. The research describes patterns in populations. It describes tendencies in people who score high on specific measures. It is a framework for understanding, not a verdict on individuals. And it applies most accurately to people at the extreme end of the spectrum. But in a world where loneliness is at historic highs, where parasocial relationships have replaced many real ones, where social media has built entire ecosystems that reward exactly the traits the dark triad describes, the pattern is more relevant, not less. The platforms we use every day were built to amplify visibility, to reward the performance of the self, to incentivize the kind of strategic self-presentation that Machiavellianism runs on. We created a world that hands people with these traits a megaphone, and then we're surprised when we keep encountering them. John Calhoun, the same researcher behind the mouse utopia experiments, spent the last years of his life arguing that the solution to environments gone wrong was not simply to identify the individuals behaving destructively. It was to redesign the environment so that destructive behaviors stopped being the ones that got rewarded. He believed that the structure of a world shapes the traits that survive in it. He was talking about mice, but he might as well have been talking about us. You did not fail to see through someone who was specifically skilled at not being seen through. You were not naive for wanting to believe in the version of them they showed you first. That version was designed for exactly that purpose. The uncomfortable thing about the dark triad is not that these people exist. It is that the world we built for ourselves keeps selecting for them, keeps placing them at the top of the rooms we most want to be in, keeps making their particular kind of performance look like the thing worth aspiring to. The map doesn't protect you from ever being disoriented again. What it does is give you something your ancestors had around the fire that we slowly lost. The language to say, out loud, what you are actually seeing. Not to shame the person across from you, not to build walls around yourself, but to stay oriented, to know the difference between someone who is drawn to you and someone who is drawn to what you reflect back at them. That difference is not always obvious in the first conversation, but it almost always becomes clear over time. The question is whether you know what you're looking for when it does.